April 1943. High above occupied Europe, German fighter pilots cruised comfortably at altitude when they noticed unfamiliar shapes struggling upward below them. The aircraft looked large, slow, and awkward against the clear blue sky. Laughter filled the radio. Whatever these Americans had brought to Europe, it didn't look dangerous. The Luftwaffe pilots watching from above were veterans of years of war. They had fought over Poland, France, Britain, and Russia. They trusted speed, climb rate, and turning ability. Compared to their sleek fighters, the American aircraft climbing toward them looked like an engineering mistake. That aircraft was the Republic P-47 Thunderbolt. It was not designed according to European fighter traditions. It was heavy, overbuilt, and powered by a massive radial engine. To get him on ice, it looked more like a flying barrel than a true fighter. Early combat appeared to confirm every German assumption. The Thunderbolt could not outturn enemy fighters, and struggled to gain altitude quickly. In the first encounters, American pilots took losses, and the mocking continued. Many German pilots believed the P-47 would never survive serious combat, but something unexpected began to happen. Thunderbolts that should have been destroyed started returning to base. Aircraft riddled with holes, engines damaged, wings torn apart yet still flying. Pilots stepped out of machines that no other fighter could have brought home. The reason was hidden inside the design. The P-47 was built around survivability. Its air-cooled engine lacked vulnerable coolant lines. Thick armor protected the pilot. The structure itself was massively reinforced, designed to absorb punishment rather than avoid it. At first, neither side fully understood what this meant. German pilots focused on agility. American pilots were still learning how to fight in a machine that behaved nothing like the fighters they had trained on. What the Luftwaffe did not realize was that the Thunderbolt was never meant to fight their way. It was built to fight a different kind of war, one based on altitude, speed, and overwhelming firepower. The laughter in the sky had begun in confidence. Soon, it would turn into something else entirely. The Republic P-47 Thunderbolt was born from urgency, not elegance. In 1940, as German fighters dominated European skies, American military planners demanded a high-altitude interceptor capable of surviving against the Luftwaffe's best. What Republic Aviation delivered shocked everyone, including the U.S. Army. Chief designer Alexander Kartveli abandoned lightweight thinking entirely. Instead of chasing agility, he built an aircraft around power and endurance. The result was enormous: a massive fuselage, thick wings, and an engine larger than anything previously fitted to a single-engine fighter. At the heart of the Thunderbolt was the Pratt & Whitney R280 OWWASP, an 18-cylinder radial engine producing nearly 2,000 horsepower. Paired with an advanced turbo-supercharger, it allowed the P-47 to maintain full power at altitudes where enemy fighters began to suffocate. This turbo-supercharger defined the aircraft's unusual shape. Exhaust gases were routed through complex ducting along the fuselage, giving the Thunderbolt its bulky appearance. To many pilots it looked overweight and unbalanced, but it gave the aircraft unmatched high-altitude performance. Training with the P-47 was brutal. Pilots transitioning from lighter fighters struggled to control its power. Torque on takeoff flipped aircraft. High-speed dives introduced compressibility, locking controls without warning. Accidents mounted rapidly. During training alone, more pilots were lost to crashes than enemy fire. Some commanders openly questioned whether the aircraft was too dangerous to use. Morale suffered as pilots joked that the Thunderbolt was trying to kill them before the Germans could. Yet those who mastered it discovered something extraordinary. The Thunderbolt could absorb speed like no other fighter. In a dive, it became unstoppable, faster than anything chasing it, and strong enough to survive the poop. Pilots began to understand that this was not a turning fighter. It was a momentum fighter. Once moving fast, it controlled the fight completely. Speed became safety. The cockpit itself reflected American priorities. It was spacious, armored, and comfortable by wartime standards. Thick bullet-resistant glass and steel armor surrounded the pilot, increasing survival odds dramatically. Meanwhile, German pilots misread what they were seeing. They saw poor turning performance and slow climbs at low altitude. They did not yet understand the Thunderbolt's true battlefield was far above them. As American units gained experience, tactics slowly changed. Pilots were taught to avoid turning fights and instead climb high, wait patiently, and strike only when conditions favored them. The Thunderbolt was not failing it. was being misunderstood, and once its pilots learned how to fight properly, the air war over Europe was about to change. By mid-1943, American pilots were finally learning how to let the Thunderbolt fight the way it was meant to. Instead of chasing enemy fighters and turning battles, they climbed higher, often well above 30,000 feet, where the P-47 felt strongest and most alive. From that altitude, the Thunderbolt revealed its true weapon: speed. When pilots rolled, inverted, and dove, gravity and weight combined into a devastating advantage. The aircraft accelerated so rapidly that enemy fighters below barely had time to react. German pilots quickly discovered a terrifying reality. Once a Thunderbolt committed to a dive, escape was nearly impossible. Attempts to turn away failed. Attempts to dive only made the American fighter faster. At the height of this dominance was the P-47's gun battery. 8.50 heavy machine guns were mounted in the wings, all synchronized to fire into a single convergence point ahead of the aircraft. When those guns opened fire, they did not create isolated impacts. They created a solid wall of bullets. Hundreds of rounds per second filled the air, saturating the target area with destructive force. German fighters had been designed to survive brief bursts of cannon fire. They were not designed to withstand sustained streams of heavy machine gun rounds, tearing through structure, controls, and engines simultaneously. Pilots who survived their first encounter struggled to describe what they had seen. Aircraft Eden T-spiraled downward. They disintegrated. Wings separated. Fuselages broke apart midair. The psychological impact was immediate. German pilots began reporting that a single mistake against a Thunderbolt meant instant death. There was no time to recover, no second chance. Even more alarming was the Thunderbolt's endurance in combat. While German fighters carried limited ammunition, American pilots could maintain fire for long seconds and eternity in aerial combat. At the same time, German intelligence began noticing something disturbing. Thunderbolts that were hit often kept fighting. Aircraft that absorbed damage continued diving, firing, and climbing away. The air-cooled radial engine proved nearly impossible to stop quickly. Without a vulnerable coolant system, hits that would cripple other fighters often had little immediate effect. As these encounters multiplied, German confidence eroded. The aircraft they had once mocked now dominated engagements when used correctly. By late summer 1943, the balance in the sky was shifting. The Thunderbolt was no longer a curiosity, it was becoming a threat the Luftwaffe could not ignore. The era of laughter was ending. The era of fear had begun. By early 1944, the Thunderbolt had completed its transformation. What began as a misunderstood high-altitude fighter had become one of the most dangerous weapons in the Allied arsenal. German pilots now avoided combat at altitude whenever possible, but there was no safe level left in the sky. New variants of the P-47 arrived with improved propellers and greater performance. Climb rates increased, acceleration improved, and the gap that once existed between German and American fighters began to close rapidly. With additional fuel tanks, Thunderbolts could escort bombers deeper into enemy territory. They no longer protected formations, only near the coast. They followed them far into Germany, waiting above, patient and lethal. For German pilots, attacking Allied bombers now meant flying through layers of Thunderbolts. Diving attacks were intercepted from above. Climbing escapes failed. The escort screen became a wall of speed and gunfire. But the Thunderbolt's most feared role was still to come. As preparations for the invasion of Western Europe accelerated, the aircraft was unleashed against targets on the ground. Loaded with bombs, rockets, and full ammunition, P-47s attacked railways, bridges, convoys, and armored columns. The same durability that saved pilots in air combat allowed them to attack at low altitude under intense fire. Heavy machine gun fire shredded vehicles in seconds. Rockets destroyed tanks and fortified positions. Bombs collapsed bridges and supply depots. Entire columns vanished in minutes. German troops learned to recognize the Thunderbolt by sound alone. The deep, thunderous roar meant death was approaching fast. Soldiers abandoned vehicles, hid in ditches, and froze in fear as attacks began. On June 6, 1944, the scale of American air dominance became undeniable. Hundreds of Thunderbolts filled the sky over Normandy, covering the invasion beaches and hunting anything that moved inland. German fighters attempting to reach the landing zones were intercepted almost immediately. Few, made it through. The air above the battlefield belonged entirely to the Allies. From that day forward, daylight movement became nearly impossible for German forces. Roads, railways, and supply lines were destroyed faster than they could be repaired. The Thunderbolt had evolved from a laughingstock into a weapon of total disruption. It no longer just fought the Luftwaffe, it dismantled the German war effort piece by piece. And still, the war in the sky was not over. Germany had one last hope speed, beyond anything propeller aircraft should have been able to reach. By late 1944, Germany introduced a weapon it believed would change everything. The jet fighter. Faster than any propeller aircraft, it was meant to shatter Allied air superiority and restore balance to the sky. On paper, the jet was unstoppable. It could outrun every Allied fighter in level flight, but speed alone could not compensate for vulnerability, limited numbers, and inexperienced pilots. Thunderbolt pilots quickly discovered the jet's weakness. It was untouchable at full speed, but fragile during takeoff, landing, and turning attacks against bombers. That was when the P-47 struck. Diving from high altitude, Thunderbolts used gravity and momentum to close the speed gap. A single firing pass was enough. Heavy machine gun streams tore jet aircraft apart before they could escape. Even against advanced technology, the Thunderbolt proved brutally effective. Firepower mattered more than innovation when hits were unavoidable. Meanwhile, the industrial war had already been decided. American factories produced Thunderbolts faster than Germany could replace pilots. Aircraft destroyed on the ground were replaced within days. Losses in the air barely slowed operations. German pilots faced impossible odds. Fuel shortages limited training. Experience vanished with every loss. New pilots entered combat unprepared, facing enemies who had hundreds of flight hours and complete control of the sky. By 1945, the Luftwaffe existed mostly on paper. Airfields lay in ruins. Aircraft sat idle without fuel. Any attempt to rise into daylight was met by overwhelming force. The Thunderbolt became a symbol of inevitability. It did not rely on perfect maneuvering or individual brilliance. It relied on survivability, power, and relentless pressure. This was not a victory of elegance, it was a victory of logic. A machine built to take punishment, deliver destruction, and keep flying until the enemy simply ran out of options. German pilots who once laughed at the Thunderbolt now spoke of it with respect and fear. They remembered the sound first. Tend to fire, then the silence after. The Republic P-47 Thunderbolt entered the war as a joke in the sky. It ended it as one of the most decisive weapons ever flown. Not because it was graceful, but because it was unstoppable. If you want more true war stories where technology, industry, and strategy reshaped history, subscribe to the channel and let me know in the comments which legendary aircraft you want to explore next.